Los Angeles was a city of dreams, but it was also a city of illusions. In the upscale suburbs, where million-dollar homes stood as symbols of success, my life appeared perfect from the outside. I had it all: a thriving career as an interior designer, a husband who had built a tech empire from the ground up, and a home that could be featured in any high-end magazine. Daniel, my husband, was the kind of man people admired. Handsome, ambitious, and intelligent, he was a natural leader. He had provided me with a life of luxury, but more than that, I had always believed he truly loved me. And for the longest time, I believed that was enough. But there was one thing I hadn't accounted for: my sister Allison. Allison was my opposite in every way. While I had always been responsible, careful, and driven, she was wild, impulsive, and dangerously charming. At 25, she was still living a life of recklessness, hopping from job to job, dating men who had no future, and constantly finding herself in trouble. Yet, despite all her flaws, I loved her. She was my sister. I never imagined she would be capable of betraying me in the worst way possible. The first sign. It started subtly, so subtly that I ignored the warning signs. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, I sat in my elegantly decorated living room, sipping on a glass of red wine. The air was warm, the scent of fresh roses from my garden lingering in the background. Allison had been visiting more often lately. She claimed she wanted to spend time with family, but I should have known better. That night, she arrived wearing a sleek, red dress, tight-fitting, low-cut, and far too glamorous for a simple dinner at home. I didn't question it. I was used to Allison's dramatics. She was always the center of attention wherever she went. Then Daniel walked in. His tie was slightly loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, yet still effortlessly handsome. He kissed my forehead, greeting me with his usual warmth. But then his eyes flickered toward Allison, and I saw something in them. A flicker of something unfamiliar. Allison smirked. "So, Daniel," she purred, swirling the wine in her glass, "you work so hard. Don't you ever just want to have fun?" I chuckled, thinking it was another one of her playful remarks. But Daniel? He hesitated. Just for a second. It was brief, barely noticeable, but Allison saw it. And in that moment, I realized, so did I. Something was about to change, and I wasn't ready for it. I should have seen it coming. The way Allison moved, the way she spoke, it was never innocent. But she was my sister. The thought of her betraying me never even crossed my mind. For the next few weeks, her visits became more frequent. At first, I welcomed them. Despite her chaotic life, I loved having her around. We'd reminisce about our childhood, laugh over old memories, and for a moment, it felt like we were close again. But something was different. It was the way she dressed, always perfectly put together, always too alluring for casual visits. It was the way she lingered whenever Daniel was in the room, her eyes scanning him like he was something she wanted to claim. It was the way she touched his arm just a little too often, laughed a little too hard at his jokes. I noticed, but I ignored it. Until one night, I couldn't anymore. It was a Saturday evening, and I had prepared a beautiful dinner: grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and a bottle of our favorite wine. Daniel had been working late all week, and I wanted a quiet night, just the two of us. But then, Allison showed up. Dressed in a black silk dress that clung to her body, she waltzed into my home as if she owned the place. "Hope I'm not intruding," she said with a smirk. I forced a smile. "You could have called." She shrugged, pouring herself a glass of wine. "I figured you wouldn't mind." Daniel walked in just then, rolling up his sleeves. His eyes flickered toward Allison for a split second before he greeted me with a kiss. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. Dinner was uncomfortable. Allison dominated the conversation, asking Daniel questions about his business, his success, his ambitions. She laughed at everything he said, even the things that weren't funny. And then it happened. She reached across the table to grab the wine bottle, her fingers brushing against Daniel's hand. It was quick, subtle, but I saw it. And so did he. He pulled his hand back, clearing his throat, his eyes shifting toward me. A flicker of guilt. But Allison? She just smiled. That was the moment I realized. She wasn't just being playful. She was testing the boundaries. And Daniel? He wasn't stopping her. Later that night, after Allison had left, I finally said something. You know she's flirting with you, right? My voice was steady, but inside, my heart was racing. Daniel, sitting on the edge of our bed, looked up at me in surprise. What? Allison, I said firmly. She's flirting with you. He hesitated, just for a second. Then he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. She's just being Allison. She flirts with everyone. I crossed my arms. No, this is different. His silence told me everything I needed to know. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to trust my husband. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning, and I was terrified of how it would end. I didn't sleep that night. Daniel's hesitation, his silence, it replayed in my head over and over. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Allison was just being her usual flirty self, and I was reading too much into it. But deep down, my instinct screamed at me. Something wasn't right, and I was about to find out just how right I was. Over the next few weeks, Daniel started acting different. It was small things at first. He was distracted at dinner, lost in thought when I spoke to him. He started checking his phone more often, even when we were spending time together. And then, there were the late nights. At first, it was just an extra hour or two at the office. But soon, it became routine. I have a big project coming up, he told me one night when I questioned him. I just need to put in some extra time. I wanted to believe him. He had always been dedicated to his work, but my gut told me something else. And then, Allison stopped visiting as often. For someone who had been practically living in my house for weeks, her sudden absence felt suspicious. Was it just a coincidence? Or was I losing my husband without even realizing it? One night, after another one of Daniel's late work sessions, I decided to wait up for him. The clock hit midnight, then 1 a.m., and still, no sign of him. I texted. No response. Finally, at nearly 2 a.m., I heard the sound of his key in the door. I watched from the couch as he stepped inside, his hair slightly tousled, his tie loosened. He froze when he saw me. You're still up? He asked. I couldn't sleep, I said, keeping my voice calm. Where were you? He let out a tired sigh. I told you, work ran late. For 6 hours? He ran a hand through his hair. Emma, come on. I don't have the energy for this right now. I stared at him. He looked exhausted, but it wasn't just from work. His shirt was wrinkled in a way that didn't match his usual long nights at the office. And then, I smelled it. A faint trace of perfume. Not mine. Something inside me snapped. Are you cheating on me? I asked bluntly. His eyes widened in shock. What? No. Emma, are you serious right now? I don't know, Daniel. You tell me. I stood up, my arms crossed. You're never home. You're constantly distracted. And now you come back smelling like... I stopped myself before I could say it. He stepped forward, frustration clear on his face. I would never do that to you. For a moment, I almost believed him. But then his phone buzzed in his pocket. And when he pulled it out, I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen. Allison. He turned away from me as he read the message, his jaw tightening. I felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath me. My own sister. Why is Allison texting you at 2 a.m.? My voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel locked his phone and shoved it in his pocket. She needed some advice about something. I let out a bitter laugh. At 2 in the morning? He sighed. Emma, you're making this into something it's not. I shook my head. No, Daniel. I think I'm finally seeing it for what it is. My husband, my sister, they were hiding something, and I was going to find out what. I barely slept that night. The moment I saw Allison's name on Daniel's phone, something inside me shattered. I wanted to believe that it was innocent, that I was just being paranoid. But the pieces didn't add up. The flirty comments, the lingering looks, Allison's sudden disappearance from my life, while Daniel's became filled with unexplained absences. It was too much to ignore. I needed answers. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention to Daniel. He was more distant than ever, but now I saw it for what it was. Guilt. He avoided my gaze when we talked. He gave short, clipped answers when I asked about his day. And the late nights? They continued. Allison, meanwhile, was a ghost. She stopped answering my texts, ignored my calls, and when I finally messaged her asking what was going on, all she sent back was, "Busy. We'll talk soon." That was it. I knew my sister. She was never too busy to talk, especially not to me. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to sit around and wait for the truth to come to me. I was going to find it myself. That Friday, Daniel told me he was working late again. I nodded, pretending to believe him. Don't work too hard. He barely looked at me before grabbing his keys and heading out the door. The moment he was gone, I grabbed my coat and followed. I kept my distance, trailing his car through the city streets. My heart pounded the entire time. If I was wrong, then I was about to make a complete fool of myself. But if I was right, Daniel's car finally pulled into the parking lot of a sleek, high-end hotel. I felt my stomach drop. I parked far enough away that he wouldn't see me and watched as he got out of the car. He looked around briefly, checking if anyone was watching, before heading inside. I hesitated for a second, my breath coming out in short, sharp bursts. Then I saw her, Allison, stepping out of a cab, wearing a tight black dress and heels too high for a casual outing. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight through the hotel doors as if she knew exactly where to go. I gripped the steering wheel, my hands shaking. This was it, the proof I had been dreading. I didn't remember getting out of my car. I didn't remember walking through the doors. All I knew was that suddenly, I was in the hotel lobby, my heels clicking against the polished floor. The receptionist gave me a polite smile. "Welcome. Do you have a reservation?" "No," I said, my voice cold. "But my husband does." I marched toward the elevators, ignoring the confused look the receptionist gave me. My hands were clenched into fists as I pressed the button. When the doors slid open, I stepped inside, my heart hammering. I didn't even know what I would do when I found them. Scream? Cry? Fall apart? Maybe all three. But I was done being in the dark. Tonight, I was going to catch them in the act. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. My pulse pounded in my ears as I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every second that passed fueled the fire burning inside me. When the doors slid open, I stepped onto the plush carpet of the hotel's executive floor. The dim lighting, the faint scent of expensive cologne and fresh linen. It all felt suffocating. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to move forward. I didn't know what I would do when I found them, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't leaving without answers. As I walked down the hallway, my heart nearly stopped when I saw it. Room 708. The door wasn't completely shut. A crack of light spilled into the hallway. Voices murmured inside. I stepped closer, pressing my back against the wall beside the door. My stomach churned as I listened. Daniel's voice was low. "You shouldn't have come through the front." Allison let out a soft laugh. "Relax. No one saw me." My fingers curled into fists. Daniel sighed. This is getting complicated." "What's complicated?" Allison's voice turned sultry. "We're just having fun, aren't we?" Silence. Then the sound of footsteps. Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. "Emma's not stupid, Allison. She'll figure it out sooner or later." I bit my lip, willing myself not to make a sound. Allison scoffed. "So what? Are you getting cold feet now?" A pause. Then, "I didn't say that." Allison hummed. "Good. Because I'm not letting you back out now." That was it. The final confirmation I needed. I pushed the door open. The moment they saw me, all color drained from their faces. Allison was perched on the edge of the bed, wearing that ridiculous tight black dress, her legs crossed as if she didn't have a care in the world. Daniel stood near the minibar, frozen mid-step, his tie loosened like he had just settled in. For a second, none of us spoke. Then I smiled, an icy, bitter smile. "Well," I said, my voice shaking with restrained fury. "Don't stop on my account." Daniel reacted first. He stepped forward, hands raised. "Emma, don't." I cut him off, my voice sharp enough to slice through steel. "Don't you dare say my name." Allison had the audacity to roll her eyes. "Oh, come on, Emma. Don't be dramatic." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Dramatic?" My voice rose, the anger spilling out like venom. You're sleeping with my husband, and I'm dramatic? Daniel ran a hand through his hair. It's not what it looks like. I turned to him, my eyes blazing. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what it is. You lied to me. You betrayed me. And you, I snapped, turning to Allison, you're my sister. She stood, folding her arms. And what? You thought your perfect little marriage was untouchable? She smirked. Face it, Emma. You're boring. Daniel deserves better. Something inside me snapped. Before I knew what I was doing, my hand shot out, slapping her across the face so hard her head whipped to the side. A sharp gasp filled the room. Whether it was hers or Daniel's, I didn't care. Allison touched her cheek, her eyes wide with shock. Consider that my goodbye, I said coldly. I turned on my heel and strode toward the door, but not before giving Daniel one last look. You? I scoffed. You're not worth a second more of my time. And with that, I walked out, leaving them standing there in the wreckage of their own betrayal. I stormed out of the hotel, my body trembling with rage and heartbreak. The cool night air hit me like a slap, but it did nothing to extinguish the fire burning inside me. My heels clicked sharply against the pavement as I walked toward my car, my mind racing. How had I been so blind? How long had they been laughing behind my back? The betrayal stung like a fresh wound, but underneath the pain, something else was brewing, determination. I refused to be the weak, heartbroken wife who let them win. They had taken my trust, my dignity, but they would not take my future. I barely slept that night. Instead, I sat on my couch with a glass of wine, staring at the city lights outside my apartment window. My phone buzzed nonstop with calls from Daniel, texts from Allison, and even a pathetic voicemail from my mother, who, shockingly, had taken Allison's side. She's young, Emma. My mother's voice droned through the speaker. You can't blame her for falling in love. Falling in love? I scoffed. Allison didn't love Daniel. She loved what he represented. A man who was supposed to be untouchable, a prize she could steal just to prove she could. Well, I had no intention of making this easy for them. I reached for my laptop, my mind shifting into strategy mode. If they thought they could just toss me aside like yesterday's garbage, they had another thing coming. First, the divorce. I wasn't going to let Daniel walk away unscathed. No, he was going to feel the weight of his betrayal. I had supported him through everything, helped him build his career, and I had more than enough evidence to make sure he paid for what he did. Then, there was Allison. She thought she had one, but she had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I called the best divorce attorney in the city. I don't want just a clean split, I told her. I want him to feel it. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Vanessa, smirked. Oh, trust me. We'll make sure he does. With that in motion, I moved on to step 2, revenge. It didn't take long to dig into Allison's life. She had always been reckless, living off of our parents' money, relying on her looks to get by. But she had secrets, and I was about to expose every single one. By noon, I was sitting across from a reporter at a high-end cafe, sipping my espresso as I handed over a folder of carefully collected dirt. This is just the beginning, I told her with a smirk. Daniel and Allison thought they had one. They had no idea the storm that was coming. I wasn't one for revenge just for the sake of it. But this wasn't just revenge. This was justice. Allison and Daniel had ruined my marriage, humiliated me, and expected me to fade into the background while they played house. Not a chance. Vanessa worked fast. By the time Daniel realized I wasn't going to just disappear, the divorce papers were already in his hands. You're really doing this? He scoffed when he finally got me on the phone. His voice dripped with arrogance, as if he still believed I would be the forgiving, naive wife. I smirked, even though he couldn't see me. Oh, I'm not just doing this, Daniel. I'm making sure you regret every choice you made. You're being petty. I let out a cold laugh. No, I'm being fair. And fair means I get half of everything, including the company we built together. Silence. I knew that hit him where it hurt. He had spent years making me feel like I was just the supportive wife in the background, but he had conveniently forgotten how much I contributed. Financially, emotionally, and even legally, helping him secure contracts. Now, I was going to take what I was owed. While Daniel scrambled to find a lawyer who could save him from financial ruin, Allison was about to have her own nightmare. The reporter I met with wasted no time publishing the exposé. The headline was brutal. Socialite's dirty secrets, from stealing her sister's husband to fraud allegations. It turned out, Allison had a habit of using rich men to fund her lavish lifestyle. She had racked up debts in multiple cities, scammed a former fiancé out of thousands, and had even been caught in a questionable investment scam. By noon, social media was flooded with comments tearing her apart. Wow, this woman is trash. Imagine betraying your own sister. Did she really think she could just take what she wanted and get away with it? Karma is beautiful. The cherry on top? Her Instagram, usually a shrine to her vanity, was now drowning in hate comments. She tried to do damage control, posting a teary-eyed video about how she had just fallen in love and made a mistake. Nobody bought it. If Allison thought she had it bad, Daniel's situation was worse. When word got out that his soon-to-be ex-wife was suing him for half of everything, investors in his company panicked. Stocks dropped. Board members started questioning his leadership. I heard from mutual friends that he was losing sleep, drowning in stress, trying to salvage what he could. Good. Because I wasn't done yet. I had one last move to make. One that would ensure neither Daniel nor Allison ever recovered from what they did to me. And it was coming soon. I had been patient. I had played my cards right. And now, it was time for the final move. The one that would destroy any illusions Daniel and Allison had about walking away unscathed. Daniel had always assumed he was untouchable. Even as his stocks dropped and investors panicked, he still clung to the belief that he could recover. But I had one last trick up my sleeve. Thanks to my lawyer, Vanessa, and the mountain of evidence I had gathered, I wasn't just entitled to half of Daniel's assets. I was entitled to half of his company. A company that was already teetering on the edge due to bad PR, financial losses, and his personal scandals. I met with the company's board members privately. I wasn't just the soon-to-be ex-wife. I was someone who had played a critical role in building the empire Daniel was now struggling to hold on to. And the board? They were tired of his reckless decisions, his scandals, and his failing leadership. So, they made me an offer. They would back me in a hostile takeover. Daniel didn't see it coming. One moment, he thought he was still in control. The next, he was being forced out of his own company, his name tarnished beyond repair. When he called me, I could practically hear the desperation in his voice. You set this up? I smirked. You set this up, Daniel. The moment you betrayed me, you started your own downfall. He cursed, but I had already hung up. With Daniel's career in shambles, Allison had no safety net left. Her carefully crafted socialite image had been obliterated. Brands dropped her, her friends distanced themselves, and even her sugar daddies stopped answering her calls. But the real nail in the coffin? She got evicted. The penthouse she had moved into with Daniel wasn't in her name, and with his finances in ruin, he couldn't afford to keep it. I made sure to personally watch as she was kicked out, her expensive designer bags tossed onto the street. When she saw me standing there, she exploded. "This is all your fault," she screamed, mascara running down her face. "You ruined everything." I crossed my arms, completely unfazed. "No, Allison, you did that all by yourself." She lunged at me, but security held her back. I gave her one last look, a smirk playing on my lips, before walking away. For the first time, Allison was completely alone. With Daniel gone from the company and Allison erased from my life, I finally felt free. I sold my shares in the business for millions, enough to start over on my own terms. 1 year later, I was living in a beautiful new home, running my own interior design company, and surrounded by real friends who actually cared about me. As for Daniel and Allison, Daniel was struggling to find investors willing to take a risk on him. Allison had faded into obscurity, hopping from couch to couch, trying to cling to whatever scraps of attention she could get. They had tried to ruin me, but in the end, I was the one who won.